I'm going to show you how we went from this
I don't wanna hear from you anymore. We don't have to talk.
to this.
I don't wanna hear from you anymore. We don't have to talk.
Hey, I'm Justin. I'm going to show you how to get a professional pop vocal sound in your bedroom. I'm going to be showing you the exact plugin chain that I use to get this sound, but I'll also give you some free alternatives to use as well. I want to shout out my friend Cass Reinhardt for providing the vocals for this project. This song is called Bitter and it's already out. First things first, before we get into any plugins, I want to cover some basic mic technique. When you're recording in a bedroom, it's usually not treated. Controlling the things that you can control is really important. So making sure your fan is off, your AC is off, and making sure the room is as quiet as humanly possible is really important. Next thing is how loud you record. You want to set your preamp gain on your microphone so that when your vocal is coming in, it's coming in around -18 to -12. You can see on the vocal that I'm working with today, it's peaking around -13. Generally speaking, I don't want the vocal to be too loud because then there's not as much I can do with it after the fact. Now that I've covered very basic recording technique as well as what level you should record your vocal in at, I want to get into pitch correction. There's a number of different tools that you can use for pitch correction, the first one being Melodyne. Melodyne allows you to record a vocal in and then manually adjust the pitch of the individual syllables or notes after the fact. So it gives you a lot more control, and it also gives you a lot more of a natural feel than something like Auto-Tune would. I'll give you an example of what I can do with this vocal in Melodyne.
I don't wanna hear from you anymore. We don't have to talk it out. I made my mind up.
So now that the vocal's recorded in, I can go ahead and select all of the notes that were recorded, and then I can automatically snap them to the grid in terms of the pitch that I want. So this is what the vocal sounds like after Melodyne.
I don't wanna hear from you anymore. We don't have to talk.
That sounds really great and it sounds natural. Auto-Tune is the other main tool for pitch correction. It's a lot less flexible than Melodyne. You can't adjust the pitch of individual notes or syllables. However, you can just set the key of the song and then adjust the retune speed depending on how robotic you want the vocal to sound. The faster you set the retune speed, the more robotic it's going to sound. So if I set the retune speed to 0, it's going to sound super robotic.
I don't wanna hear from you anymore.
For this video, I'm going to stick to using Auto-Tune because it's a bit more affordable than Melodyne and there's also a lot more free alternatives for it. I'm using the Antares Auto-Tune Artist plugin, which can be pretty expensive, but there's also the Logic stock Auto-Tune plugin, and whatever DAW you're using, there's probably a stock Auto-Tune plugin as well. There's also a lot of free pitch correction plugins like Gralian, which you can use to tune your vocal and get a good sound. For this vocal, I want the performance to sound pretty natural, so I'm going to set a retune speed around 43. This corrects the small notes that are out of key, but also makes the vocal sound natural.
I don't wanna hear from you anymore. We don't have to talk.
The next thing I'm going to do to this vocal is use an EQ to cut some low end, specifically here below 133 Hertz, and that's because I'm going to be compressing the vocal pretty heavily later, and that's going to bring out a lot of the low end from the vocal in parts that I might not even hear or see on this EQ right now. One thing I see a lot of people do is add high end to their vocals with an EQ early on in this stage and do something like this. I would advise against doing this. I think there's better tools that you can use to accomplish the same thing without boosting all the highs on an EQ. Here's what it sounds like after the EQ cut.
I don't wanna hear from you anymore. We don't have to talk.
The next thing I'm going to be doing with this vocal is adding a compressor. Here I'm using an LA2A, and the reason I'm using an LA2A is because it has a lot of character and adds some nice saturation to the vocal, as well as the LA2A is an optical compressor. And if you don't know what that means, it just means it's a light-based compressor, and so the attack speed on an LA2A is really slow. So what we're doing here is very subtly leveling out the vocal, and we're not really taming all of the really quick peaks. I'm going to play the vocal while I play with this compressor to see if I can get somewhere between 3 and 6 decibels of compression.
I don't wanna hear from you anymore. We don't have to talk it out. I made my mind up. I don't wanna try when you're giving up. You're acting like you own the law.
As you can see, I'm kind of peaking around 5 decibels of compression. A lot of the time I'm compressing less than 3 decibels, so it's very subtle. But I really like the character that a compressor like the LA2A adds to a vocal. The next thing I'm going to be doing is adding another compressor. It's called RVox. It's by Waves. It's a lot quicker attack than the LA2A, but it also adds its own nice character to the vocal. So I'm going to play the vocal as well as play around with RVox to see if I can get the sound that I like. And the other thing I'm going to do here is I am going to unmute the instrumental that I'm playing this over, because then you can really hear what syllables you can and can't hear over the instrumental.
I don't wanna hear from you anymore. We don't have to talk it out. I made my mind up. I don't wanna try when you're giving up. You're acting like you own the law. Then sit in silence.
Now I'm going to play what the vocal sounds like before and after RVox. So before RVox.
I don't wanna hear from you anymore. We don't have to talk.
And after RVox.
I don't wanna hear from you anymore. We don't have to talk it out.
You can hear we got a lot of volume and presence from adding RVox to this vocal. It made the vocal feel more upfront. As for free alternatives to the compressors that I used here, you have the Logic stock compressor if you're using Logic, but whatever DAW you're working with also has a stock compressor, I'm sure. And then you can also play around with all the different styles of compressor here. Like I said before, the LA2A is an optical compressor, so why don't you try using the vintage opto setting on the Logic stock compressor. RBox is a FET compressor, so you can use the Studio FET or the vintage FET compressor in the Logic stock compressors. I also want to shout out Analog Obsession. They make a lot of free plugins, including compressors that you can try out for your vocal. The next thing I'm going to be doing is adding another EQ. And the reason that I'm doing that is because when I added those two compressors, I definitely introduced some low end in the vocal that I don't want. And so I just want to clean that up.
I don't wanna hear from you anymore. We don't have to talk it out. I made my mind up.
Here is what the vocal sounds like before the EQ that I just added.
I don't wanna hear from you anymore. We don't have to talk.
And here's what it sounds like after the EQ.
I don't wanna hear from you anymore. We don't have to talk.
The difference is super subtle. I want to be careful with this because I don't want to get rid of all of the warmth and body. Here's an example of what this would sound like.
I don't wanna hear from you anymore. We don't have to talk.
Now the vocal sounds thin and lifeless and kind of like it was recorded through a telephone. That's not the effect that I'm going for. Rather, I'm doing a pretty subtle EQ move here where I'm cutting things below 100 Hertz, which are the parts of the vocal that you're not really going to want to hear anyway. And then in the other EQ range of like 200 to 250 Hertz, I'm removing only 1.5 decibels. So like I said earlier, I avoid adding high frequency information on a regular channel EQ because I think there's better tools for the job. Well, Fresh Air is the tool that I tend to reach for. You've got to be careful with this one because when you add a lot of high frequency information using Fresh Air, things can start to get abrasive. So I really like to use this very subtly. I might just keep this below 20 somewhere.
I don't wanna hear from you anymore. We don't have to talk it out. I made my mind up.
So here's what the vocal sounds like before Fresh Air.
I don't wanna hear from you anymore. We don't have to talk.
And here's what the vocal sounds like after Fresh Air.
I don't wanna hear from you anymore. We don't have to talk.
There's also lots of other tools that you can use to accomplish the same thing here. I also like using this plugin by Analog Obsession called OAQ. Here you have a little bit more flexibility than Fresh Air. You can actually select the individual frequencies that you want to boost or cut. And so here you might select 5 or 8K and then do a little bit of boosting. That'll get you the same or similar effect to Fresh Air where you're just adding high air. So that's how we got from this
I don't wanna hear from you anymore. We don't have to talk.
to this.
I don't wanna hear from you anymore. We don't have to talk it out.
Before I end the video, I want to note a couple of quick things that I skipped over today. I didn't use a de-esser, and I also did not go over spatial effects like reverb or delays. I find that using de-essers is not always necessary with vocals, but if your vocal does have a lot of strong S sounds or sibilances, then I definitely recommend using a de-esser, preferably early in your chain so you can address those things before they go through compression. The other thing I didn't address was delay and reverb. Typically on a pop vocal like this, I would add some quarter note delay, maybe eighth note delay, or even a slapback. I would also use some sort of room reverb to put the vocal in a space. If you want your vocal to sound really clear and upfront in the mix, less is more in terms of spatial effects like delay and reverb. And that's not to say don't use effects like delay and reverb on your vocal, it's just not something I covered today, but I will make a video on that in the future. I want to shout out my friend Cass Reinhardt for providing the vocals for this project. This song is called Bitter and it's already out. If there's anything you think I missed here, or if you have any questions or want to reach out to me, my email as well as my social links are in the comments. If you're interested in working with me, there's a link in the description, as well as a link to my free sample pack, which includes 10 guitar loops for you to use.